Hello friends, welcome to our Checkmate Architecture channel. We continue our chess studies from where we left off. In today's study, we will try to understand the checkmate. Before moving on to the checkmate studies, I want to tell you this. The queen is here, she wants the king. The king is under threat and needs to be saved. For example, let's say the king escaped to the G7 square and we beat him with the rook. And we will not say that we checkmate this king. This is not checkmate. Friends, when the king plays G7, it is called the impossible move. This is not checkmate. So, what will we examine? White's castle is in the position we will examine. I chose this simple position to understand the checkmate better. We see the black king. The king is in the last row with checkmate operations. While talking about this, it is also useful to know this, friends. We call these 8 rows where the king is the last row. The last row is the place we will often use when checkmate the opponent's king. The 8 row is described as the last row. This is the row where the king will end. This is where the rook made the b8 move and threatened the king. The king is in danger. It is necessary if the king removes the piece from the middle and the king would be saved, but the king cannot eliminate the piece that attracts. Well, if he blocked his way, he would be saved. He cannot block it with any piece. You know the black pawns he moves forward. His aim is to reach the end and be promoted. That is, the pawns cannot come in this way. The pieces in his team cannot save the king. Then he has to fend for himself. He has to escape to a safe place. Let's say the king has run away there. Will we go and eat him with the rook? No. When he runs away, we will warn him and say that it is a rule mistake. The one who makes a rule mistake twice loses the game. We see that the rook wants the king. Now, if the king runs to f8e to get rid of it, eyebrows will come. This is it. He cannot escape under threat. If h moves to 8, the rook still holds it. h8 is not safe. Yes, we wanted the king, and the king cannot escape. Friends, this is called checkmate. In order to make checkmate, we will want the opponent's king in such a way that he will not be able to escape in any way. Only in this way can we checkmate him. We got checkmated, there is no such thing now. Let's examine, for example, black check is again in the last row. We knew that when it was in the 8th row on the edge of the board, it determined this row as the last row friends. If we want to checkmate the king, we first need to find the escape squares of the king, that is, the safe escape squares of the opponent king, which I marked in yellow. Let's pay attention to the e8 and g8 squares. Let's also pay attention to the g7 and e7 squares that I marked in green. There are 4 squares around the king, but the important one is the escape frames of the king. The king has only yellow escape squares. You couldn't escape to the yellow ones either. We can't do this with the bishop. The bishop has already done his duty. We have a rook here. The rook has arrived. If we remember when the king drew, the king had yellow escape frames. The king cannot escape here. Because the rook held the entire last row, g8 cannot escape, e8 cannot escape. Yes, we drew such a king that we kept it in the king's escape frames too, friends. This is checkmate. We wanted the king so badly that the king could not escape. Now let's examine this example. We had to determine the squares around the king. First of all, let's determine the squares around the king. We will checkmate. What is the security escape frame? We determined the squares around the king. Our king is here. If we remember, we talked about in our previous studies that the king is under threat. It cannot go to the square where the king will move. The place where it will move must be safe. Black does not tell the king to look here. Let him come to e7, he cannot come. Well, f7 again. f7 cannot escape. Our own king has taken the 3 lucky squares where this black king will escape. That is why the king cannot escape to the green ones. Because we have our king, security. Let's determine the escape squares. f8 square and e8 square is here. e8 and f8e can escape. So what we will do to checkmate is to draw such a check that we will both hold d8 and hold f8. In other words, we will draw the king, we will hold f8, and we will hold d8. If you pay attention to these 3 squares, friends, to threaten all 3 squares, we can do this in our castle. We drew the king, we held the escape square, we also held the other escape square. d8 cannot come, because hold the rook, f8e cannot. So we can say that the kings cannot approach each other because the other king is holding the square they will approach. Yes, let's look at this example. The king is again in the last row. One of the advantages of the last row for us is the square at the back, where the opponent king will escape. There is no square at the back. There are either sides or above. Of course, if possible, we talked about 3 lucky squares around the king, 3 lucky ones. One of the squares is blocked by his own piece. There are 2 other squares. If the king is in danger here, it means he is trapped in the last row. Friends, since g7 and f7 are holding the horse, the king is trapped in the last row. As we have seen in our previous examples, the king has only escape room on the sides. The king's confidence. The escape squares are the squares to the right and left. So, let's draw such a check that we hold both g8 and e8. How can we do this? Should we do it with a knight? No. The knight has already done its job more than enough. It has prevented the king from going up. We will do it with the rook. We drew a king with the rook and kept the escape square to the sides. e8 cannot escape. g8 is escaping. We drew such a check. We kept the escape squares and thus checkmate. Old now, let's look at this example. We have a rook here. We talked about the lucky square on the side of the king around the king. You lucky square. The squares where the king can go up are held by our red rook. So the king cannot even go up. Even his nose, I can't extend it. We will draw such a check to checkmate the f8 and h8 squares next to it, that we will hold both f8 and h8i. Can we do it this way? We kept both f8 and h8i. Why did it not checkmate, or did it happen, friends? Because the king went up. We said 3 lucky squares, 3, we left the lucky square. We were holding it just now. Then we will do this not with the red rook, but with the green rook, so that the red rook will continue to do its job. If we do this with the green rook, look, one of them had already held 3 lucky squares. The other one drew the king and held the escape squares. Our red rook and we have green rooks. Both of them are friends. Look, one of them prevents the king from going up, while the other one draws the king and holds the escape squares. In this case, we drew such a check that we also held the escape rooks. Yes, in this position, I would like to draw your attention to this. The red rook held the escape squares and captured 3 lucky squares. Black king can only escape to the yellow squares next to him. Let's do it like this. Yes, our red pen had already captured the escape squares. Our green pen also drew the king. Was it mate? No, friends. It is not enough for us to draw the king. We also had to hold the escape squares of the king. Since we only draw the king, it will not be checkmate. Black king will run away in that case. It is not enough to just draw the king. We also need to keep the king on the escape squares. Now this is our example. Let's see. We do not have a rook here. We have a knight and pawns. We have a king. Our opponent also has a knight and pawns. While checkmate, we said that we will draw such a check that the king will not be able to escape in any way. We also have the escape squares. We said we would keep it. If you pay attention here, the king's own pieces are so tight that the king has no escape frame. It is enough to draw a check. If we draw a check, it is mate. So, how can we draw a king from here? We know that the knight could jump over the stones and threaten the stone from one end of the line to the other end. We drew a king. He can't run to the ground. Is he checkmate? No, because the one who draws luck can eat the root a piece. Then the knight moves g6. It doesn't checkmate the king because the pawn saves its own king by eating the knight, but if the knight draws the king from f7, again, be careful, he jumped over the pawns and wanted the king. Now can he save the king? Black pieces. No. We wanted to, and Shah cannot be saved in any way. This is called mat. Thank you for watching my video until the end, friends. Let's not forget to like our channel and subscribe. See you in our next video.